Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hit and Hustle from IrishSportsDaily.com. I'm your host, Greg Flamong, and with me, as always, is Jamie Uwayama, Mr. Jamie University. It is Wednesday, February 21st, and we're going to be talking about the irrelevant Notre Dame football program, or maybe possibly irrelevant Notre Dame football program, according to Stephen A. Smith. We're going to talk about Notre Dame recruiting, picked up some commitments over the last week in Matt Augustine, offensive lineman, and wide receiver Shaun Terry. So we're going to talk about those guys. We're going to talk about the wide receiver board that's coming a little bit more clear. They set an official visit with Rains Vines Bright, who is currently an IMG Academy receiver. It was a very exciting prospect. So we're going to talk about him and where they're going at wide receiver. The Notre Dame schedule, we were talking a little bit about that before the show started on how we feel about the schedule. So we're going to touch on that and anything else that kind of comes up in the chat. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If this is your first time catching us, please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe. Please hit the notification bell so you know whatever it is we are going live. The links to the podcast are in the description below. So check us out there if you prefer the audio format of this show. And before we get going, Jamie, we're going to thank one of our sponsors, which, of course, is ESQ Clothing, which is founded by Notre Dame alum Ga Wang. You've seen ESQ on all your favorite Notre Dame players and coaches. It's with over a decade of making the best custom clothing available. ESQ will help you look and feel your best in 2024. From a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt or bomber jacket, or that perfect tuxedo for wedding season, check out Ga's amazing work at esqclothing.com and book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention ISD and get 10% off your entire purchase. Jamie, Stephen A. Smith, Joe Bro says, what does Stephen A. Smith say now? It's not a big deal. There was just a whole thing he did on First Take this morning. I think they were talking about the 5+7 format that was agreed to by the playoff committee, and he was pontificating on why Notre Dame is relevant because they haven't won a national championship since 1988. Hashtag 1993, but that's fine. So it's been a while, obviously, since Notre Dame won a national championship. And why are they relevant in college football? I think some people would point to the fact that he's having the conversation kind of answers its own question, why they're relevant on the number one show. And the other part is like, are you not talking about the Dallas Cowboys then? Like, you spend a lot of time talking about like the Philadelphia 76ers and basketball. Like, we talk about a lot of like the Knicks. You talk about the Knicks a lot. Like, when was the last time they won anything? Right? Like, I don't know. So
you talk about the Lakers when they're not good. Like, it just
it's like it's like a whole
it's like
thing.
here in Canada, it's like people talk about the Leafs because it's whatever, and it's like, well, they haven't won forever, but
it's a whole thing.
They draw eyeballs. Yeah.
It's a whole thing in sports. So it's it's a fun time.
It's whatever. It's his job.
It's his job, and obviously, like, they have the number one show for a reason, because of stuff like that. There's this whole like JJ Redick thing. I don't want to get too into it because a lot of people don't watch or care or follow this stuff. It is funny how JJ Redick was talking about today about just like media in general, about how people like say they want to learn about something, but they don't, right? Yeah. Like, he was talking about, he'll put a clip up of, showing how the Pelicans are using Zion Williamson to initiate offense, and that doesn't get a lot of views. And then he talks trash on Doc Rivers, and that gets millions of views, right? Which is funny because we talk about that a lot, just like in our kind of venture here and like what kind of show we want to be, things of that nature. So it's just interesting that he kind of talked about how it's like people, they want to hear gossip and they want to hear trash talk. And it's like, if you're not doing that, it's a little bit difficult, but you got to be who you are. And that's what we aim to do. And that's what this show is all about. So, but I thought that was interesting. But Jamie, let's talk about the 5+7, right? Your thoughts on that? I think it's a little bit different. I think it secures Notre Dame's spot just in the playoff a little bit more. But did you have a comment on that? That got amended a couple of days ago.
Well, it's also hilarious that some of these people who are like supposed to cover sports for a living like didn't know that this was something that was about the rule in terms of Notre Dame not getting an automatic being eligible to get.
We talked about this a year ago.
it's old news. It's old news.
It was the first news, in fact, about the playoff.
So I would suggest to anyone who subscribes to Joe Pompliano's newsletter, maybe unsubscribe. This guy might not be on top of things. So I don't think he's really aware of what's going on with there, or maybe don't take his takes on college football seriously because doesn't seem to really be on top of it. I mean, I think it was obvious. There's no way they were going to do the 6-6 thing.
Yeah.
Because there is no power. It's the fifth one is gone.
Yeah.
So they weren't going to give it to I appreciate the effort Wazoo and Oregon State for trying to be like, well, now come on, guys. Like, the Pac-12 is still no. So I appreciate them. I mean, they got to do what they got to do, right? I think that like it was pretty obvious they were going to have to go 5-7, and I don't think it's like officially like this is where it's going to go though, because it's not like that part is agreed upon, but then the SEC is trying to get like X amount of qualifiers for it, and I think the Big Ten is too, and I don't blame them. Like the Big Ten and SEC are way better than like why should the Big 12 have other than one, right? Why should the ACC have anything other than one, really, right? Because if you look at most years, you could go through like recent history, the last decade. There's very few years where they deserve to actually have two teams in it, right? I mean, some years they didn't get one in the top four. So I think, there's still like stuff that's going to get decided. And I think it's still aiming towards that kind of like the separation of that. But I don't know. I think like, I mean, in the end, it's not good if Notre Dame is one of the top four teams and doesn't get a bye. Like I've already said that before. Like, I don't think that's good, but you got to look at it. Most of the time, they aren't going to be in the top four because they haven't been for most of the time. But there's more times they're in the top 12 than they're in the top four. So, and wouldn't you just rather have that home game and have that? They already don't play the conference championship anyways, and this is their way of the kind of keeping independence. So it's kind of a good like happy medium for now, like just to kind of that and being able to have that while still be included, because it's always hilarious that when I always see like the 12 commissioners and then it's like brackets plus Notre Dame, AD, Jackson Warwick or whatever, right? Like it's always like the fact that Notre Dame is even to be allowed in this and kind of has so much say in it is kind of crazy, but it's obviously it's earned, but it's just saying like that just shows you like the power of Notre Dame that they could even have some say. Like they have, I mean, they're one team. They have more say than the dying Pac-12 or some of these other conferences that have more. And I guarantee they would have more influence in the long run than like the Big 12 and probably most of the ACC, right? So so I think it's fine. And I also just think it's temporary because it's just going to be a thing where I think what you're going to see this year is that there's going to be some good Big 10 teams and some good SEC teams that have like 3 losses that are we want in. Like, why are we not in compared to this 2-loss Big 12 team? So that's going to be where it changes anyways. And it's just leading towards that, the quote unquote super league or whatever.
Right. It'll expand again. We talked about in the last show, like they're always going to keep expanding. It's never going to get smaller, right? Like once you go to a certain point, it's only gotten bigger, right? Like it hasn't gotten smaller at all at any point. So that's going to happen. I do think like, and it's like getting into the schedule, right? And look, here's the thing, right? For it to matter too, like with the bye and stuff, like it would be bad if they were like the number one team, like the clear number one team, and they didn't get a bye. Like that would be bad. But at the same point, like that is hypothetical. Like that hasn't happened in, like even in 2012. Like they went undefeated, and that's great, right? But it was like they were number one because Kansas State blew it, and then Oregon blew it, right? Like other teams just kind of lost, and it's like, oh, look who's number one now. Like they were never like, wow, this Notre Dame team is a juggernaut. Like they're just unbelievable. I can't see how anyone would beat them. Like that's aspirational at this point. So I think in the near future, the fact that they wouldn't get a bye, like if they're like 2, 3, 4 or whatever, it is what it is. And I kind of understand. Like, yeah, they don't have the conference championship game, right? And to knock them out, right? Like they don't have that opportunity to do that. So it's just like I kind of get it there. But hey, my thing is like Notre Dame ought to worry about being actually to the point where like I would love it. I would honestly love it if it was a situation where like they totally deserve a bye. Like they're the best team in college football and they didn't get one, and that's a bummer, right? Like let's get in that spot, and then we can complain about it. Right now, it's not something that I'm going to worry about. And speaking of, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the one thing too is that I think because like the SEC and the big, right, like these schedules are going to get tougher and tougher because of the additions that they've had. There's going to be a time where I think they're just going to get rid of the conference championship. Like that is going to happen anyways. And maybe that's only when they get to the Super League type of thing, but, or you're going to look at teams that be like, I mean, we're still going to be in the tournament anyways, the quote unquote tournament, 12-team tournament. So, I mean, is it worth it if we go to this conference championship game, even if we win, maybe we get some guys injured in this game, or like, or people don't even care about this conference championship game because it gets you the bye, but would you rather have the bye, or basically not playing in the conference championship game is a bye, right? So would you rather have that earlier, so then you can maybe rest some guys from the season that have already been beat up, and then you have that extra week, and then you get a home game instead of having to play like a neutral site game where you got to travel to the conference championship site and all that kind of stuff too. So like, in a weird way, I think it could be like beneficial as well. And I mean, especially if I was in those two conferences, I think there's a real argument to say that maybe you don't want to even be in that game, and you're hoping to kind of not be in that game, be good enough to make it, obviously, but then not have to play in that game, because then you get, to rest your guys before that.
Yeah. Michael Mahoney says he predicted the conference championship to go away last month. Michael, we'll monitor that. We'll monitor that going forward. Jamie's on that and Michael's on it. So you two can carry the banner on that take. Notre Dame schedule, Jamie. They came out they finally announced the Army game, which is going to be November 23rd in New York City. It's going to be at Yankee Stadium against Army, right? 100th anniversary of the Four Horsemen. The blue-gray October sky. Should play the game in October, whatever. It's a Shamrock Series game. So you have Army and Navy on the schedule in 2024. You've got two MAC teams on the schedule in 2024. People aren't buzzing. Or if they are buzzing, they're buzzing about the wrong thing. Jamie, what is your take on the schedule? Are you upset? Does it bother you? Where do you come out on this?
Yeah, I mean, from a friendliness perspective in terms of them doing well and winning, I think people should be pumped about it, because it easily sets up to be the best one, the easiest one that they've had since 2021 was, I mean, first of all, go back and look at the 2021 schedule. It was a trash schedule. They didn't play many good teams in 2021, and they really only had, it just was like, bad luck of the draw that Cincinnati was like the best team that they've ever had, and that they were coming to Notre Dame that year and won that game, because really, and I know Notre Dame squeaked by in some of these other games too, but like that 11-2 Notre Dame team was not as good as some of these other 10-win teams that they've had in other years. It just was kind of how that worked out in terms of the schedule. And I think if you look at this schedule, they don't have, so from terms of easiness and where it sets up with the buys and all that, I think it's a great schedule for a Notre Dame fan because you got the opener, obviously Texas A&M, and these are from the SP Plus preseason, projections, right? So, shout out to our buddy Michael Bryan he posted this on his Twitter account. You should follow him. He's a good follow at Michael Bryan MB on Twitter. Great dude. Great dude for analytics too to follow. But so first of all, Notre Dame is ranked higher than anybody they play. Texas A&M 13th to start. Then you play Northern Illinois 93rd, Purdue 86th, Miami, Ohio 53rd, before you get to Louisville 24th. So you have, 4 games or 3 games that are kind of, I don't want to say easier, but I mean, definitely should be wins. There's no doubt about it. You should have wins before you play Louisville at home. And then you have a bye. And then you have Stanford 94, which Stanford I think is actually going to be a little bit tougher than that, but they're still not going to be like good. Georgia Tech 60, Navy 104, bye game or bye a week again. And then finish it off Florida State 12, Virginia 81, and then Army 98, and then USC 23rd. But we've already talked about how USC's got the gauntlet there, so we don't know how good they're going to be. But it's kind of like set up where it's like they don't have any of those like 4 straight weeks of just like, man, these are tough, like in a row. They don't really have that. They don't have back-to-back super tough games, right? So from that perspective, you're like, okay, that's good. And from the perspective of like an easier thing, like you said, the 2 MAC teams, you're playing 2 service academies, you're only playing 8 Power 5 teams or Power 4 teams or whatever, right? That's pretty good. Like that's a good situation. And then you basically swapped out Miami because they were supposed to play Miami this year, and then Miami switched it or whatever. So Joe Bro mentioned, did they drop the Miami game? Miami dropped that game.
Rajon,
yes, and Rajon did it. So Joe Bro and Rajon both mentioned it. Thanks, guys. So, and that was supposed to be a home game, whatever, right? But you're swapping that out. Miami, regardless, whatever you think of Miami, that was going to be a tougher game than Army, right? So, you're making it, instead of 9-3, it's 8-4, and then you're playing, another service academy. Like those are. It sets up good from that perspective. But the other perspective, and it's something that we talked about right before this podcast, Greg, is that it's not really exciting. It's not
fun. Like it doesn't get people all fired up. But like the service academies, like no one likes it. It doesn't matter. Even if they're good, like no one wants to play.
It's not a fun game ever. No.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the problem. Like this is always going to be, it's always going to be like worked out, like, okay, like 2021, right? In hindsight, it's terrible, but like you have Florida State, you have Wisconsin, who a lot of people liked in the beginning. You had Cincinnati, you were at Virginia Tech, you had North Carolina. Like Virginia was good until Brennan Armstrong got hurt, right? And so they were like a big problem. And then there was,
and you still have USC, and
you still have USC in there, right? So like. I feel like we always have this conversation in March, February, April, talking about the schedule one way or the other. It's going to be a gauntlet. It's going to be, it's going to be this or it's going to be that. And then by the time the season comes, like who in the preseason was like, you know what? Like the stretch between like NC State and Ohio State and Duke and Louisville, like that's just going to be a crazy gauntlet where like all those games are going to be against undefeated teams and they're all going to be at night and it's going to be terrible. And then you have the USC game. Like no one said,
I did think that 4-game stretch was going to be tougher than people thought. Cause I didn't want Louisville, but not as tough as it seemed. Like you said, not the whole night games in all row, but I knew Duke was going to be like, that was going to be a tougher game. Even before like the Clemson thing, I was like, Duke's going to be pretty good. Like they're going to be.
I think the one that did it was Louisville. That was the one where it
and
was
obviously
like,
they lost that game.
Yeah. Like the one that Louisville was the one where it was like, hey, like they weren't supposed to be undefeated. Like they weren't supposed to be, like that. They weren't supposed to be that good. But that, like, I feel like that happens all the time. Right. And here's another one from Abe Froman. Okay. whatever the schedule is, you have to win 4 playoff games. Just beat the team you're playing on Saturday. So that's the deal, right? There is no more like, like this Michigan, they you schedule 2 hard games in November and you skate through and whatever. Like that can't happen anymore because now, especially for Notre Dame, like you have to win 4 playoff games. Like by definition, you have to beat 4 top 12 teams in a row to win a national title. So like there are no flukes, especially when it comes to Notre Dame. Like there are no flukes, and so that's kind of how you look at it too, where it's like it's just gonna come up where it's just like, yeah, maybe the regular season isn't that great, but here's the thing: take care of business. Take care of business in the regular season and then get on to the playoffs. You know what I mean? Like no one will care. Even if the schedule is as bad as you think it is, if Notre Dame finishes undefeated and ranked 5, no one will care. No one will say, you know what? I know we're undefeated, but I don't like that. I don't like that wasn't fun for me. There's just no way. Like everyone will love that, right? And so you got to take care of business. You got to win some playoff games. Okay. And you got to take the next step as a program. It's just what you have to do. Like, it just is what it is. Like, the schedule is what it is. They're favored, are going to be favored in every single game.
Except for A&M, probably.
Well, I'm talking about, like, the advanced stats.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Like, win probability, I think they're above 50%.
Yes, they are. Here, I'll pull up the Michael Bryant thing again if I can.
I want to say they're 56% now, 53, 56%.
So 56% versus A&M.
Yeah.
I mean, they're above 80. They're above 70 in every other game. The next lowest on the list is USC on the road at 72.2. So, Florida State at 65.2. Excuse me. But then 65.2, 72.2 for USC. And then it's like a lot of them are like above 90. Louisville is even 81.3%. I mean, that's why you don't play these games. You don't just put it into a thing and then spreadsheet it and just decide who's going to win the game. Enjoy all the audio listeners. Enjoy my great special effects that I added into that. But I don't think, just they should. They should. Like I said, whatever I said last week in 6 odds, like there's zero reason they shouldn't win 11 plus games next year, just based on the schedule.
You have to do it. They just have to. All right, let's switch gears. Let's get over to recruiting. They picked up some commitments from Matty, Augustine over the weekend, and then Shaun Terry over the weekend as well. In the 2025 recruiting class, Jamie, we're going to look at some film on those guys. And I have to say, like, kudos, before we get to Shaun Terry, congratulations to their video staff. The film, the angle that they have behind the goalpost, Jamie, it's like up high. It's beautiful. I love it. It just, there's so many guys with terrible tape. I've talked about it before. The tape is awful. It's almost field level. It's like I can't see anything. Camera's all moving around. I don't like watching it. I
guarantee it helped Shaun Terry get offers.
100%. And you can see like his skill set in the way that he can move in and out of traffic, the way that he sees openings. It also doesn't. It's not a great look for some of the players that he's going against.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just some not hit and hustle, Jamie. It's unbecoming, right? Like I know it's lower level, but you know what? Low level guys can hustle too and work your butt off. Like I saw so many times instances where I'm like not even watching Shaun Terry, I'm watching the defense. It's like, could you please pursue? Could you please get on your horse and pursue this play from the backside so you can make a tackle, make a play? Jeez, do these guys not get yelled at in film? My goodness, they got to clean that up. But it's important. The film's important, Jamie. And before we get to the film, this film Chalk Talk is going to be brought to you by BSRMediaCompany.com, which is founded by Notre Dame football pregame host and Emmy Award-winning anchor Vahid Sadrazadeh. VSR Media provides professional and cinematic video and photo. Whether you're looking for a collegiate or pro-level highlight reel, have a personal story to tell, or are aiming to diversify and grow your business, VSR Media specializes in short and long-form video storytelling, social media management, and website design. VSR Media also captures professional headshots, senior, and sports photos. Contact them at vsrmediacompany.com and mention Irish Sports Daily to receive 20% off your project. Visit them online or give them a call at 574-800-9106. Jamie, let's start with Matty Augustine, the offensive lineman who committed to Notre Dame. What do you like about him? Who was your comp for him? And where do you see him playing on the offensive line?
I mean, he's definitely a tackle. He's got great feet. My comp for him was University of Washington, former left tackle for them, Trey Adams, who was like a multi-year starter there. He's an all Pac-12 guy. I mean, he was another guy who came from a very small town in Washington. I mean, obviously, you'd love to see finish like this, right?
Yeah.
You love to see finish. See, it's a guy he works hard to sustain, and he's like a guy who wants to finish blocks. And I think with that kind of stuff, I always just want to see just the mentality. Like, does this guy like actually like? It's almost like, do you really enjoy this? Because not too many guys are putting people on the ground with, if they're not. But look at that just right there in pass pro, like resetting the hands, just balancing his set. And that's really the main thing why he's a really, really good prospect, is that he's obviously long, right? Like he's got like everything that you kind of need there in terms of, his size and arm length and all that kind of stuff too. But you see just like his balance and how he plays with his set, and how he's able to kind of just like anchor, he can control people with his hands. And that's just something that really stands out with him. And he can do all these things. Like he can go out and reach the edge. He can get to the second level as a run blocker. I mean, he's gained a lot of weight recently. And that's good. And if you watch him play basketball, he still moves really well. I would say he needs to get a lot stronger in his lower half. And that's where he needs to add the most weight. Because if you look at him here, and you can see he doesn't look 290, and obviously he wasn't 290 here.
Right.
He's got to get stronger in his lower half, and he's got to get just more pop. Like he just more hip snap. He's got to get that kind of thing to be kind of a more effective run blocker. But I mean, when you're looking at tackles first, it's like everybody wants like okay, so Abe Froman mentions he looks like he has some nasty in him, and he does, right? But, and here's a perfect example of him just kind of like finishing through the whistle. And that's great. But a lot of guys have that. And first of all, you're not going to finish guys like that in college that often, unless you're, Quentin Nelson.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like the ability here to like go there, pass that guy off, get perfect like that kind of like awareness, but also just like the feet to be able to get out and get somebody there. And pick up an inside blitzer and then get back out and pick up the rush coming off the edge. Like that's the kind of thing that matters more, because in the end, you're going to be, whether or not the guy's an NFL player, whether or not the guy can play at a really, really high level, you can't start at Notre Dame. You can't play and go on to the NFL like a lot of these left tackles have for Notre Dame if you can't pass block at an extremely, extremely high level. And that's what he can do really, really well, right? So I think he's someone that, he camped at Notre Dame. He earned his offer in camp. They really, really liked him in person. He is like just a massive, massive frame kid, and just one of these guys, like I've, seen him in person. He's got like big hands, like just he's a big dude, and he's going to continue to get bigger. So there's no doubt in my mind he's going to weigh like, it's not a thing where Emil Wagner, where you're like, man, this guy really needs to get it, and it's going to be a fight for him. I don't think it's going to be much of a fight for him. Like he is going to be over after his freshman year. He would be shocked if he wasn't over 300 pounds at that time. I think that's going to be fine. And really, it's just like more of like a question of like, he's got a chance to develop and got a really, really high ceiling, but it's like, how quickly can he develop? How quickly can he like get stronger in his lower half to be able to do that kind of stuff? And then they got like Will Black in the class. Strebick can obviously play.
Yeah.
Like, are they going to add in? So, Rajon mentions Jack Lang he's another possibility to add in the class, and he's another guy who can play tackle. So, it's going to be, they just have Gerby Lambert and Styles Prescott in the class before, right? So, they are doing really well with offensive tackles, and I think they needed it because it was like, weirdly, they didn't have the kind of options they had, or they recruited a bunch of guys, which is something that kind of would happen with Harry with a lot, where he'd take a lot of swing guys that were probably better guards than tackles. And now I think they're getting more guys that are like, fits at tackles. But I'm always like, get a guys who can play tackle, get those Pattersons, get those Haineses, get all these guys who can play, but they can play multiple spots too. Because like Strebick, I think, could play inside as well. And I mean, we'll see with these other guys, but you just want as many guys that you think you can play left tackle as possible. And Augustine is one of those guys.
Watching this film, it kind of struck me like, man, it must be awesome to be a quarterback in high school and your left tackle's going to Notre Dame. Like that work,
yeah.
Right? Like you never know who you could get, right? Like in the high school level, like what kind of caliber of offensive lineman do I have? Oh, he's going to go to Notre Dame. Like, that's good. So looking at some of the rankings, someone was asking me over the weekend, like when he committed, like he's a 3-star guy composite. Will Black's the 3-star guy composite. Owen Strebick is a 4-star, but he's kind of on the lower end of the 4 stars. And I know you've been very critical of like the 247 rankings. I think especially with respect to the offensive linemen. So give us kind of like a what? Let me put it like this: what are your ratings on these guys? So just like let's do Augustine first, and then do Black, and then Strebick.
So Augustine, I gave him a grade of 91. So he's like a low 4-star, but it's like the same as kind of like where like a Styles Prescott was at that same time last year. He moved up to like a 93 for me after senior year. But I think one of the things with him is, you're looking at kind of like size wise of what he looked like in the fall compared to where he is now. And also, well, I mean, this kind of leads into the other guys too, because Will Black is another guy who's from like the Northeast. He's originally from Canada, and he plays, high school football in the Northeast. And also like Strebick is from Wisconsin, which is obviously they produce a lot of linemen, and he's like he's a top 150 guy. So he's not like lower rated or anything like that. But if anything, but I actually have Will Black the highest out of them all, is the 93. And then Augustine is 91 and Strebick 92. But I think like I'd say Augustine has a higher ceiling than Strebick, in my opinion. And I mean, both Augustine and Black have super, super high ceilings. And like one of the things, and it's something I was like, I was DMing with, guy, I know you're familiar with him, Greg. So Bud Davis, he does a lot of like, analytic stuff. And he does a lot of stuff in terms of like recruiting and like looking at like trends in recruiting and all that kind of stuff too. And one of the things, if you look at like, say, like the NFL draft for this year, right? There's like, I can't remember the exact number. I should know off the top of my head, but I don't. It's like I had it written down in 6 thoughts from a few weeks ago, but they were like, there's like a first round mock out, and I think it was Dane Brugler's, and it was like, I want to say like 9, or the first 2 round mocks or whatever it was. And there was like 9 guys who were like offensive and defensive linemen that were there that were not blue chips, right? And a big reason behind it was because these guys are not from areas where they don't have the camps as much. So they don't have these. So if you're not in the Southeast where there's like, or Texas, where they have so many camps and so many opportunities, they have way more like analysts who work for these companies, 247 on 3, whatever, right? Like rivals. There's more people that cover that rather than like Midwest or North, definitely Northeast. There's not like a lot of like Northeast guys. Like who other than Brian Doan or whatever, or I think it's Doan. Sorry if I mispronounce it, but who other than him who's like the Northeast guy, and he's like got to cover like New Jersey, and he's doing all these different areas. So if he doesn't see this guy in person, who's seeing Will Black in person, right? And so that's like one of those things where it's like they're wrong on a lot of these guys, just like they're wrong on a ton of Polynesian kids who like come from like American Samoa or California or Hawaii or whatever, because they don't just get to see them that much. And also too, like they have the most physical development to do, the most like intelligence is like a big part of like whatever. And it's not to say all these guys are going to hit or whatever. And that like, oh, I know more than that. I'm just like, I just do it. I just look at traits and I look at like what they have and how they move, you know, how big they are, all that kind of stuff, what the frames are like, and the information that I get. And some of obviously we're able to get some more access to some of these guys, specifically if they're Notre Dame kids, in terms of like some of like their measurements and all that kind of stuff too, where maybe, you know, because especially those guys who camped at Notre Dame, right? So we, you know, and you get to see them in person and all that too. So that's like a big thing. And I know like Christian has seen Matty Augustine like play basketball. Like he's seen him in person play basketball, and he's seen a lot of different guys play basketball over the years. And like, I definitely like use some of what like Christian told me about like what he saw from him playing basketball, and not just how he physically moved, but just how he competed in my evaluation of it. Right. So there's just a lot of guys that kind of like can slip through the cracks there. And I mean, whatever, it's not like to say that all guys are going to be like, you know, they're missing out on all these elite guys, because there's not a ton of elite guys that out there. But, you know, chances are if like Notre Dame is after these guys in the other schools that are after them, like, you know, like Black was like, it was a Notre Dame Michigan battle, whatever, right? It's like, well, I think both of these schools know how to evaluate offensive line, you know, quite a bit better than most schools. So if they're really, and if he's really that kind of like high priority on their list, you know, maybe take a look back at your rankings and see where you're at, because I think that's definitely, you know, a thing where they like get a lot wrong there. And that's something that like Bud Davis was telling me, like, he's like, yeah, one of the things with it is like where they miss the most in the NFL draft is because there's not enough coverage. There's not enough people who see these people, who evaluate. So it's not just about like the competition that they play. It's just, they don't hire people to work out there. And fair enough, they don't have as many recruits out in that area. So why would they? But it's just because of that, that's how they miss on a lot of things.
Like it's just a practical problem sometimes. Like you just can't get eyes. And it's like, just because you're not watching them doesn't mean they're not there, right? Like, so that's what's kind of hard. And so, you know, the conversation that I was having is like, why can't they get like these blue chip offensive linemen, like these really top rated guys? And I was like, I think they consider them that. Like, I think that Notre Dame thinks that they are that, right? It's not like a settling thing, right? And then I hear you talk about them, and it's like that kind of matches, right? So, like, it kind of goes back to the conversation we had, like one of the hot takes days, when it was like, I said recruiting rankings are a sham, right? And it's not that that's a very like hyperbolic way to say it, but like it's kind of for this reason. Like, what can they do? How do they move? What are their traits, like you say? And then you project that forward, right? And so the ranking is kind of just a product. It could be a product of a lot of things, right? Is like people not seeing them, or people not getting out there, or the competition, or they had a bad day at a camp, or whatever. It's just like there's so much more data points that you can hit.
Yeah, there's so much context that needs to be added to it. That is, you know, and like I said, like no one gets them all right. I'm certainly not like anywhere close to batting 1,000 with it. And I mean, I get my fair share wrong too, right? But I definitely think that, like, specifically with line play too, I think there's a lot of guys who maybe don't understand line play as much, and kind of like it's just so easy to be someone to be at a 7-on-7 camp and be like, oh, well, this guy's the best guy out here. He's catching all the touchdowns. Like, look at him just like run and jump over top of these people and do all this. It's like, yeah, like it's just like anyone can go watch a basketball game and see like this guy's scoring the most points. He's the best athlete out here, and he's just whatever. It's like, well, it's different than scouting a guy who's like, you're doing something that's like people aren't watching the line as much, or you don't understand like all these things that are like some things that are teachable and some things that aren't, or things that if someone has this and you don't have to teach that guy that because he already has this, that's how the value of it. Right. So, yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it, but I mean, I would also just look at the recent history of Notre Dame and all these guys who were not elite. Like Zach Martin he's a 4-star, but he wasn't like elite, like considered the best guy anywhere close. He's a Hall of Famer, right? Like Ronnie Stanley was not a 5-star, right? And he went to Bishop Gorman, which was like, obviously like a very high profile school, but he wasn't considered there. Like, and Mike McGlinchey was like a low 4-star, right? Like there's all these other things that go into it. And those are just like those other guys. Like Quentin Nelson was considered, a very high, highly recruited guy. But yeah, so I don't know, but just there's just all these different things that go into it that kind of make it like it's not to say that Notre Dame shouldn't be like there was that one year that when Notre Dame landed Hainsey and Banks, right? And obviously both those guys ended up being really good, but they didn't land. That was a really good year on the offensive line, but they didn't land some of the other guys that they wanted, like Trey Smith and Jedrick Wills. Would that have been great if they land them? Yeah, those guys were both awesome, and they're both like starting in the NFL, but they still did pretty good with how they did. And those guys were, Banks and Hainsey were both 4-stars, but they weren't like, considered 5-star guys or whatever. And they played better than some of the 5-star guys.
Yeah. All right. Shaun Terry, wide receiver out of Ohio. He commits to Notre Dame. Jamie, we were talking about before, he's got some of the most electric film you've ever seen. My only question is like the size, like what is the size and then the speed, and how does like this kind of skill set translate to a situation where you're playing guys who you can't just crisscross the field like this, like you can't just go in and out. Right. And like, that's sometimes like that trait just, it manifests itself no matter who you're playing against. And sometimes it does not give people a little bit of an idea.
It's like, there's only one Barry Sanders, right? Like that's the thing. But I mean, look at this, like you said, the film, like just those, just like quick cuts, the quick, like just be able to just like plant your foot and go, like this kind of stuff. He is an electric returner, like just an electric returner. Like he's and breaks tackles. I mean, not that those are great effort by those guys, but still like he's there fighting for it. And you just kind of love to see that. And, so he ran. One of the big things and one of the reasons why Notre Dame took him is he ran like a 4.5 recently. Right. Yeah. So he that's one of those things which doesn't make him like a straight out burner. Like he is not in the Rondale Moore, Jalen Waddle, like, Tyreek Hill, like that kind of slot speed. Like there's a different thing there, but he's plenty fast enough. And you can just see it on film. Like this guy runs away from people. I know it's not the greatest comp, but it's just like, you could just see it. He's fast. He's fast enough, and, but yeah, the question for me is size. Okay, so you can do this now and you can do it when you got space, and that's great. And I think he could be like a great yak guy, like, yards after catch. But okay, well, you gotta get open against like elite nickels. Well, you gotta be like, you can't just be fast and you can't just have change of direction. Just like you got to develop as a receiver. And obviously with his size, because what is he listed at, like 5'10", 170?
He's listed 5'10", yeah.
Yeah, which means he's probably a bit shorter than that, which, to be honest, that's usually how it goes. And that's fine, but it also means like he's not going to play anywhere other than the slot probably. So, is he going to just be a gadget guy? Is he going to be just a returner? And I think he could just be a returner and be an elite returner, because it's just like one of those things where you're like, well, people could say like CJ Sanders, maybe he didn't live up to kind of the hype and he never became that slot receiver that people kind of thought he was. Well, just the fact that he was a great returner was more than enough. Like that means he was like a great take. He was like a great player for Notre Dame because of the value that he added as a returner. So if he could just be CJ Sanders, that would be awesome. So from that perspective, I just like the tape because I like the take in from that perspective, because I think he really could be that and maybe more, right? So I think it's a good pickup, but obviously you want to see more guys who you think could be like wide receiver one types, and I mean I don't envision that for him. So yeah.
So you just don't see like moving in and out of traffic like this very often, right? It's like from a Notre Dame wide receiver specifically, just in terms of who they've looked at, like that is special. Just because the pursuit isn't very good or whatever, like you do have to do it, right? Like you have to see the lanes, you have to see the cuts, you have to make the moves, and you do have to slip the tackles, right? Like so, you can't just say, well, they're bad. Well, it's like, well, not everyone at his school is doing that, right? So there's that. To your point, though, like I feel like Burris and Terry are both like Logan Saldate third wide receiver guys, like the third wide receiver in the class. But that Notre Dame doesn't have like a Cam Williams or Micah Gilbert, who they're kind of complimenting right now. Isn't it to say they're bad takes? I don't. That's not what I'm saying at all, right? We're both excited about Logan Saldate, right, and what he can do at Notre Dame, or what he possibly could do at Notre Dame. And so I'm excited about these two as well. But to your point, like they do need just kind of a guy. And like when we say like, and especially with Mike Denbrock being here, when we say like the number one guy, I'm kind of off talking about that needs to be the boundary, right?
Oh, it doesn't have to be, yeah.
Right. Like because you look at LSU, especially this year. Like there's so many stuff, like we follow a bunch of draft accounts and whatnot. They're showing Malik Neighbors, like he's doing so much in the slot, right? Like he slot to the field, right? Like not even slot to the boundary, like slot to the field. Brian Thomas also to the field. Like these guys they're doing so much more. It doesn't have to be a boundary guy. So it's not like it has to be the Derek Meadows body type or anything like that. But it does have to be a guy like Will Fuller is a perfect example. Like not number one wide receiver body, but he was the number one wide receiver at Notre Dame because he's just a playmaker. He's just very explosive. And so they've got someone coming on campus who I think fits that, right? And I think, and I'm wondering your take on this. I'm talking about Raiden Vines-Bright. I know Matt's in the chat, right? I know he's watching. He's very excited. This is Matt's guy. And honestly, Jamie, I think I have to, if we were doing like last show, we did the like must get guys. I think Vines-Bright is close. In fact, he might be a must get in this class, given who they've gotten already. Like I wouldn't have said Shaun Terry, and I wouldn't have said Elijah Burris, right? But I think Vines-Bright is that, especially if he's going to be like 6 foot, 6'1". He doesn't look that tall to me. Now that's the question that I have. Is he that, or is he like 5'10", 5'11", right? Because I think that's important. But this guy is explosive, right? He can separate. He's got really good long speed. He's got a 10.800 time as a sophomore in high school. Interested to see what that's going to be in this spring if he elects to run track. But he did go over to IMG, right? So it's like that's very focused on football type thing. He was a where did he come from? Arizona. He came in from Arizona. So now he's over at IMG, and doesn't have like a ton of offers right now. I think that's probably going to change because I think he's a real good player, Jamie. And we were talking before, Raines Vines-Bright. elite name, right? You could get an elite name wide receiver like skill position class with Dallas Golden. But what do you like about Vines Bright as we watch some of his highlights here?
I mean, he can really run, right? Like that's the thing is
Yeah.
he can fly. I mean, I think that it's it's I think on his I mean, you see him just running away from people here, but I think you see on his like Twitter account, he's like 4'4". He doesn't look 4'4" to me. I don't think he's that. This guy's also like a Sluggo demon, just destroying people on the slant and go. That's something that that's very Will Fuller-esque, right? Like that's something I think is. I mean, that's also Denbrock-esque, right? Where you're just like, that's definitely like something he can do. Where he just has that like first little bit acceleration where he could separate, and I think that's the main thing. I think he is like he's a big time speed guy, and I just think they're missing that from like I said, Terry is really sensational in terms of just like that open space guy that he can do that, but he's not going to straight just destroy people just running by them. Or like I didn't see any of that, like just in terms of him like running a slot fade right by somebody or whatever. Where Vines Bright, you can see that from him. And first of all, Vines Bright is like really underrated nationally. Like he's going to, like you said, he's going to be someone right now. Like I think he's a 4-star for sure, and like he's not I think in the composite right now, but he's going to be. So I wouldn't worry about that. I just think he's the kind of deep threat that they need in the class. I think in terms of when you're looking at what they have, I think he is an important guy in the class and kind of like who they're after, because I do think it's like, if you're trying to get like, fit and check all the boxes, you want to get like a guy like this, great catch there, by the way. But you want to get a guy like this on top of like getting a Derek Meadows, who could be that big. Obviously he's a speed guy too, but he's that big speed guy, or like a Quincy Porter or whatever, who is that big boundary type, right? Like that's how I see it.
Yeah. So you just, I just think like of all these guys, like if I look at, like, I don't know, like Tylan Taylor, like, are they in on him? Like, I don't know how, like, I haven't heard his name very often. They set up an official visit for Vines Bright, which is, I think, in March. I think it's in late March there. So he's going to be on campus. So they set up an official, right? That's a pretty big deal. So they set up an official for him. I think Meadows is there as well. But like, of all the guys where it's like, who's going to be a star, right? I think Vines Bright is probably most likely in that category. Like and one way I look at these guys in terms of like prospects or whatever is, I think like, okay, if you're telling me it didn't work out, why didn't it work out? And I feel like for Shaun Terry, it's like not that big, right? And the slipperiness and all that didn't translate to major college football. Elijah Burris, I would say, the skill set and getting open in high school didn't translate to major college football. Just couldn't separate, right? And didn't have the long speed to kind of separate in that way too. If it didn't work, I'm not saying it won't. I'm just saying like it's kind of easy to identify. Vines Bright is a little bit difficult, right? It'd have to be something more intangible, like it just he got like there were injuries, or he didn't like Notre Dame. So he just like it'd have to be something kind of off the football field, because like as a football player, you feel like, man, like this skill set is kind of translatable all over the place. Matt's in the chat. Our Rains Vines Bright will be on campus March 23rd and then mid-June for the official visit. So he actually has 2 visits set up. So that's a big deal, right? So that's something to monitor and something to track. Another thing to monitor is on the message board today, Christian noted that Devin Williams set up a return trip to Notre Dame. We have him as a must get in the Notre Dame football class. I think a lot of people were down on the fact that he didn't show up for the junior day. which was weather related, right? And people get kind of skittish about like, well, is it really that? No, it was really that. And he did set up a return visit. So that's going to happen in April. So he's coming to Notre Dame. Then he does have serious interest in Notre Dame. Mike Mickens doing a great job with him and trying to get him back on campus, in fold, committed. We're going to have to monitor that. And we're monitoring the Dallas Golden Mark Zachary situations as well. Notre Dame feels really good about that. So again, right, you feel good about those guys getting Vines Bright on campus. A lot of people asking about Bettis. To me, I think of it a lot like Urlacher from last year, in that you can take him if you want to take him. Like, to me, the numbers are like kind of irrelevant, right? If you want to take him, but like you can't turn away someone like if Vines Bright, let's say Vines Bright committed, right? And it's like, okay, so now you have 3. You can't be like, well, we're taking Bettis and that's it. Like, no. You got, like, you still have to go try to get Derek Meadows. You still have to go try to get someone else who you think is going to fit a need for you, right? And so that's how I felt about Urlacher. It's like, you want to take him, then take him. Like, there's stuff that you can do and that he can do. There's stuff that Jerome Bettis can do. Like, he can help the Notre Dame football team, but you can't like count him against a position. You can count him against overall numbers if you want, but you can't count him against a position, right? In my opinion, that's how I see it. What is your take on that?
Yeah, that's what I would say too, right? And which is kind of goes with, we think that, with Bettis, who we think is going to commit, sometime in the future, right? That they'll take 2 more, right? So they'll take 5 in the class. And I think if they were taking 4 and you looked at with those guys, I think you view it differently, right? Than if you were to send it, and if Bettis was 1 to 4, you'd probably look at it from a different perspective. Just like if they took 2 safeties last year, and it was instead of taking 3, right? So that's kind of the way that I view it.
Yeah. Michael's asking, do you consider Meadows more of a developmental wide receiver? If so, aren't Terry, Burris, and Bettis that as well? And then he goes on to say, that's why I feel the remaining takes at wide receiver need to be elite dudes. What I would say, Vines Bright has an elite trait, which is his speed and his ability to separate. Mike was talking about this on Power Hour on Monday, and it's like, when we say like they have to be elite dudes, it's like, sure, but the elite dudes have to be available to you. Like, you got to sign the best guys you can get. And if the elite guys, like the Jamie French, like someone brought, if he's not interested in Notre Dame, you can't sign him, right? Like, you do need to sign a wide receiver class. You do need to find the best guy.
You can't be like, well, we're not taking anybody because we can't get Jamie French. Yeah.
Right. Like, and it's not like, it sounds simplistic, but it isn't. Like, you do need to bring in numbers, and you do need to bring in guys with the traits you feel like can help you win football games. So go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say, like, Meadows, I would view just like you would view Chase Claypool, where you're viewing someone and you're like, this guy is just, there's going to be stuff that he needs to develop, but he's got freakish traits that this guy could develop into an elite dude. Where I would say these other guys, I think with Terry and Burris for sure. I think those guys, like you say, like Terry could be elite returner, could be elite after the catch. Those are his things that he could be, right? And with Burris, I think he could be an elite route runner. Like, that's where he separates, right? And with Meadows, it's like he could just be elite at everything. But that's why it's there. And so, I mean, would you rather have Jamie French than Derek Meadows? Yeah, I would. I mean, I'd trade that for sure. But you'd still take Derek Meadows, because Derek Meadows has a chance to be, Chase Claypool, right? Like at Notre Dame, right? So, or better maybe, right? So who knows? So just like, that's why, I mean, and whatever, not to step on something that I'm writing for 6 thoughts, but you look at like the top guys in the NFL draft this year, and it's not 5 stars. It's not those guys like, sure, there's definitely guys who become that where it's like, Michael Floyd became Michael Floyd. Like he lived up to all the hype. There's AJ Green and Julio Jones. They were like designated dudes from day one, and then they like lived up to that and more, right? Like those guys were great in all the way through. But like there's like a bunch of guys where Rome Odunze, 221 in the composite, right? Like Keon Coleman, 377. Adonai Mitchell was like late 300s. Brendan Rice, 336. Roman Wilson, 354. Malik Neighbors, 251. Malik Neighbors, 251. Even Marvin Harrison Jr., who's like, he was highly ranked. He was a top 100 kid, but he wasn't like, he's considered the best receiver prospect by some since Calvin Johnson. So he wasn't a 5-star. Like, and I liked him a lot, but I had him like just outside of the top 50. Like Brian Thomas, I did have him in the top 50, but he was a top 100 guy for everybody else. It wasn't a top 50. Like, why is Brian Thomas? He ended up better than a lot of these guys, right? There's just so much more that goes into it than just being whatever. And it's also too, like, I think that's a problem because the 7-on culture of like, this guy's so good at this right now. It's like, well, it takes more than that when you actually are playing like real corners in at the next level, or you going against zone and you got to like know where to go. You have to have intelligence, and you have to have savvy, and you have to have all these other physicality and these things like, winning, just like showing late hands so you can get, so they can't finish, like all of these little pieces that make you great at receiver, in addition to like being a guy who can run 4.4 or whatever, right? It's like Jamar Chase. Yes, he was considered a great prospect, but he wasn't like, he wasn't like top 5 in the class when he came out, right? Like it's not always like that, right? Where it's just, there's a lot of development that goes in it. There's a lot of projection, and like a lot of those guys, obviously went to big time schools, but I don't think Marvin Harrison was the top guy in his class, when he went, like, because he was in the same class as Egbuka, and Egbuka, don't get me wrong, he's a stud too, but he's not as good as Marvin Harrison Jr. So it's just one of these things. I'm not saying, man, Mike Brown's going to develop all these guys into whatever. It just doesn't work that way. But you have to get guys who have the traits that are elite, like we talked about. But just because a guy is not ranked because he's ranked 250 or he's ranked 300, whatever, does not mean he can't be an elite guy.
Yeah. And the other part too is and this isn't just wide receivers, it's every position. Like it does come to a point where we do have to show some humility in that we don't know how they evaluate and view all these wide receivers. I don't know how they think about it. I don't know how they feel about Tylan Taylor or Vines Bright or Porter. I don't know how they feel about them, right? So they're not here. Like, so Michael's saying, and like Michael, these are fair questions, right? These are absolutely fair.
This is what it's for, yeah.
And it's a good discussion, and it's totally fine. So don't feel like we don't like that. But what I'm saying is like there does come a point where it's like our opinion is our opinion on these guys, but we don't have all the information that they have or how they feel and how they've talked about it, right? I don't know these players. I haven't spoken to them. How they feel like they fit in the offense, right? How Mike Denbrock thinks they fit in the offense, right? Like all these things, like he is now a part of this, right? So it's just, and in terms of Bettis too, like I don't want it to be a thing where like if they take, like he's a take for Notre Dame. He just is. So I think the thing that we have to, like, I don't consider it the fact that if Notre Dame takes 4 plus Bettis, he didn't take anyone's spot.
Yeah.
He did not, right? And I don't think he would. So, and so that's how I feel about it, right? And so it doesn't really concern me. So that's kind of how it is going forward. But it's something to monitor, right? We're going to be monitoring this all throughout the spring, all throughout the offseason. It's about what they're doing at wide receiver. And there's plenty more developments to come. So, Rajon, who did you mention a few minutes ago as a must get? I was Vine's Bright. I think he might be in that category because I don't see really anyone who is like super interested in Notre Dame who can separate the way that he can. That's how I feel about it. So you got to get that skill set in your building because speed is everything. Speed truly is everything. All right, we're going to end it there. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If this is your first time catching us, please subscribe to this show. Please hit the like button on this show, and please hit the notification bell so whenever it is we are going live. We'll probably be back. We might do a show on Friday. Jamie's got some stuff going on this week, so he's not going to be available too. Might do a show on Friday. We'll see. I got some things in the works, but if not, we'll be back next week at our normal time. So thank you everyone for tuning in again. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good rest of your day. Keep hitting and hustling.